one of the things they wanted us to do is just to find out a little bit who you are, and so we can keep in touch with you as the year goes on. So I'm going to pass around a sign-in sheet. If you would just sort of put your name, primarily name and email address. You can put where you work, whatever, but anything like that would be great. And the way, my name is Matt Linam. I'm a pediatric infectious disease doctor. I worked at Arkansas Children's Hospital for about 8 years and helped take care of Kaylee Hardig, who was a survivor from back in 2013. And I'll let Alejandro introduce himself in just a second. But really, we wanted to make this just an interactive time. You know, we don't have any specific formal thing that we're going to be presenting or anything like that. This is an opportunity for us to kind of put our heads together and think through how we can sort of move the ball forward. So one short interaction. They are recording this, so all that we would ask is that when you speak up, make comments, just be loud enough that the camera can pick you up.
I'm Alejandro Jordan, pediatric infectious diseases that works here, Florida Hospital, and Aaron Palmer Hospital as well. So actually I've seen the face of most of you.
All right. So are all of y'all from here and work at Florida Children's?
Richard Rodriguez. I'm a general pediatrician here in Maine, nearby here.
Okay.
Sunshine Pediatrics is my practice.
Okay, cool. Everybody else work here? Okay. Nurses, physicians?
We work in the peds ICU.
Okay.
Three of us.
And pinky shirt.
Pharmacists.
Pharmacist. Okay, great. So I had talked with Steve Smelski a little bit earlier today, just kind of get a sense of what he was hoping for us to accomplish today, and really what he was hoping that as a group that we could sort of identify 2 to 3 or so sort of action items that we could take back to the foundation as some things that could potentially be done to help improve things from a treatment standpoint. As y'all know, there, at least as best as we understand right now, there is a cocktail of medicines out there that have been successfully used a couple times to treat patients with PAM. And there's certainly still a lot of opportunities for research to better determine what is the right drug. Is this do we need all of the drugs that are in this combination? Are some more important than others? Are the routes that we're giving these all important, or can we do things differently? Duration, is that is 28 days, or is that really what's needed? So there's certainly areas for research, and those efforts are challenging just because cases are so rare. But within that, I think there are some opportunities that we could discuss. I was going to just kind of prime the pump a little bit as some things that might be some things worth talking about and brainstorming. One is in the last year, and we saw this in some of the presentations earlier, there were some discussions about an algorithm that's been created to help guide both the early detection but also the management piece. And I think that would be a great area for us to discuss, a little bit that algorithm. Is it good as is? Can we offer any suggestions for improvement? But even more importantly than that, how do we disseminate something like this beyond the Florida Hospital for Children, across the state, across the region, across the country, so other clinicians aren't sort of scrambling around and potentially leaving out important pieces. And then the other thing that I would maybe throw out there is another thing that might be worth discussing is miltefosine is one of the drugs that we use in the treatment of PAM, but it is not one that most hospitals stock, and that's for good reason. It's one that has a very narrow use and is an expensive medicine to keep on hand. but getting that to the patient in a timely manner is really an important piece of things. And the drug company that distributes miltefosine has created a drug consignment program, which is actually really fantastic. It allows hospitals to keep a stock of the miltefosine on hand. I think y'all are part of that, where you actually can keep a stock of the medicine on hand in your hospital. You don't actually pay for it unless you use it. If it expires during the time that you're holding that medicine, the drug company will replace it, without cost. And I think that's a fantastic way to help get medicine, closer to where it's needed, and how to maybe sort of get that information of that opportunity and try to encourage other hospitals to maybe go this route if they're an area that sees cases of malaria. I didn't know if you had other thoughts.
One of the things that we do with the algorithm, at least in Florida Hospital, is when we get a call from a patient from a satellite hospital or satellite region that they need to be transferred with the concerns of the amoeba infection. For the transport team, we created this bag where we put the medications on. So in case the hospital doesn't have it, as soon as the transport team gets to pick up the patient, they can start giving the medication on transport, and we don't delay treatment. So those bags have some of the medications they could fill. They don't have all of them. Actually, some of them include miltefosine to be able to give it a route. It contains what is called rifampin, fluconazole, and azithromycin. The only one that we don't have, and it's really important, is amphotericin B. So one of the things that we can improve from now on is either be able to stock that one in one of the satellites, hospitals, so they have it available to be given. It's one of the medications so far that is considered probably one of the most active medications against amoeba. What we're discussing just right now upstairs, whether or not just to give the other formulation, which is the liposomal formulation. In the meantime, it's probably better to give that liposomal that don't give anything. Other thing is, the majority of these medications are orally. So even if the patient doesn't have an IV access and you need to give the medication, they can be given by mouth. Actually, all of them except amphotericin can be given by mouth. So it's something that we're doing right here to try to expedite the administration of the medication. I don't know if you guys have any other idea what we can improve the distribution or the administration of the medications, or any other questions regarding why those medications, why not to use other medications, and things like that. These medications are really easy to find, the majority of them, believe it or not. They're really, really common use medications every single day in the common.
You said the old antivirus is tough to.
Well, most places nowadays use the liposomal just because it is easier on the kidneys, doesn't have a lot of the other side effects that we see with the conventional amphotericin, where it earned its name, amphoterable. So a lot of hospitals don't stock the conventional because they don't use it enough, because everybody uses the liposomal.
Especially adult hospitals.
Yeah.
Now it's mainly used for neonates. It's mainly used right now the conventional. So many of the adult hospitals don't carry the formulary because they don't use it. But probably just better to give that one that don't give any, just waiting for the transport.
Yeah, because I notice a lot of the interactions between like the ERs and the outlying hospital, for the transport, or the infectious disease, intensivists and stuff, that sort of thing. I don't know. In a general practice, you see something like that come in, you go to the ER, you get all your stuff done. Because I know personally, I haven't had a kid's ears. I've had all these vaccines that take care of everything. Pretty much, it's I'm not as gung-ho now to tap into the thing that comes in.
But but in the practice, will be really important to be aware that if someone comes with flu-like symptoms, especially in Florida, to ask about exposure.
Right.
So right now we're trying to kind of enhance our awareness in the hospital setting, and every time that somebody comes through the AD, to be able to ask those questions when they have symptoms consistent with meningitis or flu-like illnesses. But maybe it's an opportunity in the practice, because most of these patients they go first to the pediatrician before going to the emergency room. They don't want to go to the emergency room. Maybe you see them and say, some headache, some fever. This is probably
early. They're all teenagers.
Yeah.
I had one yesterday. Shepherd's little volunteer clinic here. there's no water exposure on this one.
So you probably say, oh, this is viral illness, go home. If you don't get better in 48 hours, come back.
Right.
When the patient comes back to see you in 48 hours and they have more symptoms, probably it's already too late, to start the treatment and have a better, kind of success treatment. So maybe it's a good idea, even in the pediatrician community, in the practices, to be able to ask those questions and increase awareness. And that, I think, that will increase, the treatment success.
So what are some thoughts that y'all had? I'm always, I'm intrigued to sort of, what made you choose this group over, another group, and what are some of the things that sort of spurred y'all to come to this group? What brought you here?
I think mostly because, well, us, for instance, we work in the Kids ICU, so we want results. Like, we want to see what we need to do, how we need to treat, what's the best way to treat, what's recommended. At the last summit, I know that they brought up the fact that, I may have it wrong, but when the amoeba is actually cooled, it goes into a capsule kind of state. Is that the best way to treat it? Does it have to be in that state before it can?
No, that's actually a really good question.
They didn't bring it up this time, so and I know we'd like to hear about that again.
That's a great question. The Naegleria is a thermophilic organism. It likes warm water. It is more active in warm water, and so you think the opposite side of that coin is, well, if it's cold, it's going to be less active. It may sort of shell itself off into a cyst and become inactive. So does cooling actually make a difference? And I know in their case as well as our case, our ICU docs, as one of the forms of management, cooled the patient. And really, the reason for the strategy was not so much as a therapeutic intervention against the Naegleria, because I'm not sure that the degree of cooling that we were doing to the patient was cold enough to really upset the amoeba enough that it felt threatened and sort of became inactive or anything like that. I don't think, we didn't test it in a way to know, but I doubt that really had a big impact on the amoeba itself. What it really was there for was one of the many interventions that were being used to keep that intracranial pressure, keep that brain swelling under control. And personally, I think that's almost as important as the antibiotic management. If a child shows up late, our diagnosis is delayed, our treatment is delayed, I think that's one piece of the puzzle. And if we don't get children identified quickly, don't get all of the medicines started quickly, then that infection moves very quickly, and we'll find ourselves behind the 8 ball, where even when we get those medicines started, that process is already raging out of control, and there's not really a way to get them back. But I think even for those children that are diagnosed early, treatment is initiated early. If they're not also in a facility where you have ICU docs that are very skilled at managing brain edema, then I think you're also working against, you're very challenged in trying to have a good outcome. Because once that inflammatory process kicks off, you see this exuberant response from the immune system, and all of this, between the injury from the amoeba as well as all of the inflammatory cascade that sets off, you just get this massive inflammatory process, and that's the swelling and the damage from the brain swelling is really, I think, what ultimately kills the patients, not the actual direct injury from the amoeba. So that's another really important piece. We talk about the medicines, and we talk about early detection, and that's important. We talk about the medicines and getting miltefosine, to the bedside, to the patient as quickly as possible, in addition to the other pieces of the puzzle. But then I think it's also important to talk about the management of the brain edema, because I think that's really an equally important arm of things.
So I think that in your case, the hypothermia was started as soon as you saw the increased going, the ICP was going really high.
Yes.
So what we did in our case, because of the experience, from them and the paper, was as soon as Sebastian came, we started the hypothermia right away, even before we got any problems with increased internal pressure. And what you see, Sebastian, internal pressure actually never went up. It could be because we started all these things ahead of time before it happened, or it could be because he was never
Yeah, he was kind of electively intubated.
He was exactly. So,
around.
but that was because of their experience that
Right,
we decided
exactly.
to do it right away.
Yeah.
No way until the. So, but if you look at hypothermia in general right now and the outputs of hypothermia, it's really unfavorable right now. So for a lot of things that hypothermia used to be used, it's not used anymore. For this condition, because all the survivors have received hypothermia, I think that we have to continue with hypothermia because there is no way to show that it's not part of the treatment. But besides the management of medication, you need to be in a facility that has all the resources, to handle increased pressure. All these patients will go on hemodialysis, most of them probably secondary to the side effects of the medication that we use. So you truly need to be transported to a really good level of care with experience.
Now, one percentage of the southern U.S., southeastern U.S., we have the distances from outlying clinics to
So that's what we created, this algorithm with transport, and it's an urgent transport. So depending on how far the satellite hospital is, we'll see how to transport them. Either wait for our transport unit to go and pick them up, or actually have that facility to bring the patient in as fast as I can. We even consider they're really far away to send a helicopter to pick them up. Even just for the suspicious of the accident.
There was one of the docs here he's from Lakeland Regional. He says that's one of the busiest ERs, and more busier than Tampa, Lakeland. And it's between Tampa and Orlando, but there's something about Polk County there that there's a lot of little clinics on the outside that feed into Lakeland. So, I guess it's important that the major centers are prepared for.
So in
a lot
Orlando,
of things. That's not just this, but a lot of these
so in Orlando, the two big hospital systems, we do carry the multiplicine for both the system in pharmacy.
It's only Florida. Florida Hospital.
Orlando has as well.
Orlando.
Yeah, so both of them have it. Both of them has the LR system in the EMR. Florida Hospital does have the algorithm. We don't have it at Orlando Health. But both of the hospitals have the multiplicine on site. Both of them has LR systems in the EMR to make the decision of where to order the test, or at least to ask for the exposure.
Is there a power plan built for PAM now?
Not yet, but we're working on it. So what we do right now is just basically the algorithm, but power plan, for the medications pre-check, I think we're working on it.
So I know from the pharmacy perspective, that's one of the biggest challenges is because the initial anti-infectives, there are so many. Obviously, I know the miltepacine is the priority, but beyond that, it's hard to differentiate which one to make, which one is most urgent.
I don't know where we're in this one, but we don't know which one is the priority.
Yeah.
To be honest.
And
We have no idea.
Some of them are quite laborious to make. So
Yeah,
it's like, we could invest all our time making, the rifampin first, which is like the hardest one to make, or make the easier ones first. But we have to all those orders come in at one time, so we have to prioritize.
Whatever you have handy, do it first. Probably amphotericine.
Just whatever you can get out the door.
Yeah, I think that the most of the experience is with amphotericine.
Yeah.
Miltepacine is kind of new. Definitely, some of the survival cases have received miltepacine. Some of the kids that didn't survive, they received miltepacine as well. So it's not that this is the medication that is going to make the change. I think it's all that we've been talking. It's the combination of the medication with a high level of care, early diagnosis, awareness, really good handling of the brain edema. I think that's like number one. So if you ask me what medication to give first, whatever you have, and go out of here thinking the miltepacine is the only medication or the number one medication. So if you don't have it available, keep the other ones.
Yeah, I would agree. Just talking with Dr. Cope from the CDC, and I think I agree with her. I think if I had to pick of all the medicines that we currently recommend, if I had to pick one that might not be as important as the other one. It's probably the rifampin. We don't know that, so I don't want anybody to walk away and say, oh, they said don't use it. I'm not saying that. But if of the one that's sort of in the cocktail, the one that probably has the least evidence supporting it is probably the rifampin, and I think it's still sort of in the list because it's happened to be sort of part of the drugs that were used for the other survivors. So it's we just, until we know not to use it, we'll still kind of use it. I'm interested, I guess, with y'all being in pharmacy and sort of part of that drug consignment program. Is that a difficult process?
No. We just call our representatives. So if we use something, we just give them a phone call, send them an email, and they'll replace it within, I think, is it 24 or 48 hours, depending on if it's a weekend or not.
How much do y'all keep on hand? I'm just curious.
They're in all our transport. Well, we have.
They come in packs of 10.
10 bottles?
10 pills.
10 pills.
In a pack. And
Okay.
we at least have 20 pills.
Okay.
If not more. I don't know the exact count because we actually keep it in the adult pharmacies since it's a more centralized location.
If you open one, have you kind of basically opened all 10, or is it like
No, they're
single blister packs?
Mm-hmm, they're blister packs.
So
When
you
they
could give.
first-
So you could give a. I'm trying to learn myself. So you could give a single dose to somebody for this kid that shows up that maybe is coming in from an outside hospital or showed up in an ER here at the hospital here, and we're like, hey, we're worried about this kid. Let's go ahead and give him a dose. You haven't sort of bought the whole course, or you haven't opened up a whole pack of meds.
They
You
used-
basically just use one dose.
Yeah, they used to be in a card that was like cardboard, and you'd have to like rip the cardboard off, and it kind of ruined everything. But they've repackaged them, I think, since.
What is that about?
Yeah,
Yeah,
that's I've seen.
they've
Sorry.
repackaged it since, and they're just like traditional blister packs now.
Okay.
Yeah, and that's actually how we put them in the transport bags. We just perforated all the packages and just stuck them in the bag.
So we're not going to give every kid that comes with a headache and some water exposure a Z-Pack, are we?
No, please don't. The athletic stewardship people out there
Yeah,
will
we'll be
probably,
happy.
probably have stomach cramps.
Truthfully, the miltefosine company was easy to work with when Sebastian came in because we didn't actually have it in stock when he came. But all we did was call them and just say we need it right away, and they just drove it to the hospital and dropped it off at the front door basically.
I think with Sebastian, we're starting to make the contract for the consignment, but the contract was not finalized, and then he showed up and they came just basically to the driveway and just.
No problem at all.
So the supplier can get it to you within hours?
Yeah, they're located.
They're actually
by the
located in
Orlando
Orlando.
Airport.
Oh.
Yeah, so that medication
Candy.
is actually FDA approved for leishmania. So that's the FDA approval and indication. But it just happened, so for this type of disease, it continues to be investigational off-label medication. But it does have an FDA approval.
Yeah, I think it has, like, if you look on Lexicomp, it's listed as one of the uses of miltefosine, but I don't think it's an FDA-approved use, but it is. Is that right?
Yeah.
But it's listed as an indication, and they give dosing recommendations on Lexicomp, but it's not an FDA-approved indication, even though that's, we have a pretty good sense that it's important to use. The reason I was asking about all these, the questions about the consignment is, it seems to me that would be trying to help get the word out about the drug consignment program to other children's hospitals, probably more important for academic children's hospitals than, I don't think that every community hospital, in the South needs to have one. And I'm not sure that, adult hospitals necessarily need it because the vast majority of these cases are in children. But I think getting a stock of medicine into, kind of major centers across the South where they see cases, I think would be really helpful. If you had, miltefosine that was like 30 minutes away from you or an hour away from you, that's a whole lot better than a phone call, someone distributing it, getting it to an airport, flying it over, and then driving it over. I mean, you can shave off. I know for us, when we diagnosed Kaylee, the next morning I was working with the CDC to try to get the medicine, and there took some hours to, there's paperwork to fill out. It had to get, flown from Atlanta to Little Rock, and it took some time. I think they got it to us faster than they'd ever been able to do it before, but it still was, about a day. We'd started all the other, we started all the other medicine, like that Friday night. We were supposed to start the medicine for the miltepozine Saturday evening. It didn't make it on the flight that it was supposed to, and so we actually weren't able to start it until Sunday morning. But she had all the other stuff going. So, to me, sort of shortening that window down, even to just a couple hours could make all the difference in the world in getting that on board.
Would you ever treat it, when you just suspect you have it, is it that critical that you have to get it so fast that, how we do with some of these other bacterial meningitis, just blast it, we'll check the culture later. I don't have time for that, boom, just blast it.
I think that's one of the challenges with Naegleria. It's the same with some of these other things like, a fungal meningitis or TB meningitis or something like that. The treatment is so different. You can give a kid that comes in that you think might have bacterial meningitis, you can give them, vancomycin, ceftriaxone. You've covered your waterfront for bacterial. You may throw, acyclovir if you think it could be HSV. But I mean, you can do a very narrow cocktail of medicines that really covers a large waterfront of potential pathogens. But if you're starting to talk about, thinking, could this kid have TB meningitis or could this kid have Naegleria, it's an entirely different cocktail of medications that carry a lot of side effects. So I think most people would rather have a good sense that this is Naegleria before they sort of launch off in, starting amphotericin and conazole or voriconazole and rifampin and launching in down this path and doing all these things.
I thought maybe because the PCRs, you can still get the PCR even if you have, right? If you can't grow it, at least we got the.
But the PCR, unfortunately, we have to send the sample to the CDC. Once they get the sample, they give you the result either the same day or the next day. But still, you're delaying. If you're going to just rely on the PCR.
What is that company that they come by the office of reps?
BioFire?
Yeah.
Yeah, they come by and go,
BioFire.
hey, you can PCR everything here, man. Get sneezes, PCR. I go, I don't need all that stuff. But they keep bugging me because I don't order a whole lot of that.
Mm-hmm.
It's those times I'm fine. The parent wants to know what it is. PCR swab to see what it is, but it's viral.
Yeah.
Yeah, we're discussing that. I think a good part of the diagnosis will be to be able to bring PCR to your own hospital or a localized place in the state without having to send the sample all the way to Atlanta to have it done.
But like you said, the point of service, a little rapid testing, rapid. How much? That's just it. How much do companies commit resources to finding something that's it's like anything else? The more common it is, the more potent. That's the difficulty with a lot of those research and development.
So I think one thing that may be worth taking back to the larger group is how can we sort of ramp up the drug consignment program and even be a little bit more strategic in sort of making sure, it's like, these are all states that have had cases of Naegleria or certainly at risk for cases of Naegleria. Can we strategically make sure that we've got, that we've...
Can we follow another example, like, what about the antivenoms for snakes and stuff like that? Not all the ERs have antivenoms. I don't know, maybe they do it in Florida. We've got a lot of rattlesnakes around here and stuff. But what is the procedure for that sort of thing? Could that be followed similarly?
Yeah, I think it probably would be something similar because I know, not all hospitals carry, rabies immune globulin or rabies vaccines. They're kind of strategically placed, throughout.
It seems like snake bites or something that can be pretty rapid responses. Those venoms.
So that's one thing I personally, would like to take back and maybe explore, because I think that's a way that we can help with treatment, is to sort of figure out how to get miltefosine closer to where it may be needed outside of Florida. You had your hand raised.
When we had a case on July 4th, some kids came in to the hospital, and it was suspected amoeba. I'm not sure that I'm one of the managers, so I got a call, so I was coming in that night to like kind of ramp up staffing with them. So I don't really know exactly what happened, but I'm pretty sure like the LPs were done, and there was a suspected, and so they were gonna. Did you know about it? So what happened? Did we send a sample to the CDC and they were closed?
So, no.
And we
So it was 4th of July, which is a federal holiday.
Right.
So what happened is when the lab does the sample, kind of the initial look at the CSF, they thought that they saw the amoeba on the white cell. So we started, obviously, the medication because we don't wait for confirmation and things like that.
Okay.
So
we can go ahead
aggressive.
without getting
Yeah,
any confirmation.
So
from
we
CDC.
did start some of the medications. Now when we saw the kids, talked to the CDC, then we kind of, by history, didn't fit amoeba. So
Okay.
that changed a little bit, that particular cases.
Okay.
Because we were not as aggressive, we didn't do hypothermia, we didn't do any type of, brain edema, nothing like that, because the presentation didn't fit, basically. But while waiting for make the call, seeing the patients, they did receive the medications in the emergency room, because we don't wait. So what happened after that is we revised the sample again with the manager of the lab, do the special stains. We didn't see anything, so definitely it's less likely. We sent pictures to the CDC of the slide, so one person at the CDC looked at the slide and said, no, it doesn't look like that. The CDC, even though it was a federal holiday, they said just ship the sample, we get it on the federal holiday, and we brought the sample. So we actually sent the sample the 4th of July.
So they did.
They received it that day like at midnight, and by next day, the 5th of July in the morning, we got the result that were negative. So although they were closed, technically they're actually open to receive the sample. And we got
So
the
are they
result by
closed
the
on
next
the
day.
weekends?
They are closed
Is
during
it something
federal
new?
holidays, which was the 4th of July. But actually they opened for us. And they received the sample at midnight, and early morning, like 3 or 4 o'clock in the morning, we got the results.
Okay.
So they did run the sample. But those cases were a little bit different because
Yeah.
the story did not fit really well the incubation period of the time.
Yeah.
But when we kind of figured out everything, they did receive medications. Waiting for that.
I didn't know if you had to have the okay. If you had to have the CDC.
No, you don't need the okay from the CDC. So if you have a really a highly suspicion,
Okay.
you start the treatment. You obviously have to talk to them, report the case. You have to send the samples, and they will give you the last kind of the final confirmation with the PCR. And actually, they do the culture as well.
Okay.
So there is not just the PCR, but they culture the amoeba as well.
So is that a question that y'all think is a useful question? In how when to start?
When to start.
Do we have I think the algorithm is good, but when do you start? How full court press are you? When you're sort of in that time from door to you still don't have a positive test yet. When should you're still sort of in that gray period. You're worried. You don't have a diagnosis yet. What do you do? To me, that's a good. To me, I would take that as that's a good question that I would have. That I know I would struggle through is, you don't want to find yourself dragging your feet, not starting something, only to find out, 12 hours later that you've just wasted 12 hours because you didn't jump forward. But you don't necessarily want to hit a kid with a bunch of medicines and things that are potentially nephrotoxic. You don't want to necessarily electively intubate them and start doing all these other things. Take them to the OR and put an EVD in if you don't need to. But one of the things I love, about sort of the progression from the case that I was involved in to their case is that you just hit the ground running. We were a little bit more, not hesitant, but we were just kind of waiting to see what was going to happen, and we didn't immediately put an EVD in. We waited till she started to have some signs of, when she started to have some cranial nerve deficits. She started to have some gaze some lag, that's when we'd already sort of let our neurosurgeons know. They knew what we needed. We'd already sort of made a plan, but we didn't actually pull that trigger until she actually started to show some signs of increased intracranial pressure. And then they started with all the management of everything once she started getting more sick. I love, the next step up is where they, as soon as they knew the diagnosis, they didn't hesitate on, in addition to sort of starting the medicine straight out the gate. It sounds like you started all the other.
We do everything.
You sound like did everything else straight out the gate. And,
with the DVD, we were able to send, we were sending samples to the CDC every day to check for evidence of amoeba.
We did our lab and CDC every day.
But I think that's another good question is, should you preemptively, be sedating, intubating, placing an ABD on these kids as soon as you have the diagnosis and getting all these things started, which is what they did. And, arguably, Sebastian, had a much shorter course. And, at this point, we don't know whether that was just some differences in inoculum and, immune response, or, did they, start the curve, they flatten the curve here, whereas we weren't able to really get the curve flat until, up here, where they were able to, make a much more rapid turnaround because they didn't allow that inflammatory response to really get going in the first place. So I think that's another good question is how
That'll
quickly.
reveal itself, I guess, as time goes on, these more cases. You can start seeing what's working.
Mhm.
It's kind of better on the go. But I'm one that trusts, you document what you see. That's why the neuro checks, okay, now go. But if you know it's amoeba, I don't care if the kids can juggle on it, get them down, just get it cleared up.
Any other thoughts? Because I think we're supposed to go till, is it 1:45?
No, actually, I have 2 minutes to wrap up.
So yeah.
Not for treatment, but for education, is there any effort on a national or state level to mandate this as a CME for nurses and physicians, PAs, nurse practitioners? Just like you do HIV, AIDS, medical malpractice in the state of Florida, you have to take that to get your license renewed.
I don't
It would
think
seem
so,
in
but I
Florida
think
that
there's
that would be
I think
appropriate.
there's, probably benefit to a targeted approach.
Then everybody-
Picking the right group.
Yeah.
I think I think of the first line responders. I think I think of being emergency physicians and maybe also critical care physicians.
I know some hospitals have for staff privileges, they say, okay, our medical staff requires you take this computer learning. We've had a deal with both ORMC and
It's not mandated, but from the workshop last year, then we have done some education and CME. We did run rounds for the adults about 3-4 months ago. The lab is going through several training throughout the year and looking at the slides and going through presentations with that. And there was some talks about doing some type of CME requirement, something live, to do an online course. But it's not mandated by the state. It's something that I think that we need to make it that is reportable, so that way then it has more weight into things, because unfortunately it's not a reportable disease in the country. So you first have to push for to be reportable, and then I think that will trigger more things of education.
Any other last minute thoughts, questions?
So if we summarize, we need to look into the drug consignment program and try to see we can, in each state, localize big hospitals that are kind of centralized within the state, so they will be able to get the medication. If somebody shows up, it's possible we have the medication within hours instead of waiting for the CDC to ship it. So that goes through the dispensing medication and the consignment. The other thing is whether or not add in the algorithm of treatment if amphotericin, conventional amphotericin is available to do the liposomal, waiting until you get to a plate that has the conventional one. I think that bringing awareness to the pediatrician clinic is good because I don't think that there is kind of a standard to check for those things. And as I said, that the first time that the parents are going to go is probably to the pediatrician. And if the pediatrician has after hours, probably that's going to be the place that they are going to show up first, to the after hours in the pediatrician office. Priority of the medication, I think that, as I said, I think that we give whatever we have first. I don't think we should have to wait to, so we can put it there on the slide. When to start treatment, I think that's a decision that we have to think. You know, we start on every single kid that we suspected. We wait at least for the confirmation from the micro lab. You know, what suspicion do we have to start all this? You know, this cocktail. And the other one is, do we need to be aggressive like we did, or should we wait to see how they progress? And there is no good answer because, you know, with Sebastian, you can say that maybe if you continue with the medication, he was never gonna need to be sedated and intubated. He may need, and if he needed, maybe it was, you know, too late to do it. It's impossible, you know, it's impossible to know. So I think that that's, as you said, the more cases that we have that are, you know, successfully treated, we may be able to have more data to see what is the best way. If you ask me if we have any other kid that comes and is confirmed, I think we're gonna be aggressive again and do everything that we do with Sebastian. But maybe it's difficult to know what is the right way to do it. Because definitely, you know, sedation, hypothermia has a lot of side effects within the just hypothermia protocol. And the other thing is, we still don't know what is the right duration of treatment. In Sebastian, the duration was shortened a little bit because side effects of the medication, and the amphotericin was not giving the whole regimen, the 28 days, because the same side effects. He did well, but it's difficult to know. I think that once you get to that point, you have to kind of change medication, you know, depending on how the patient is doing.
Thanks, guys. Thanks for participating. It was great.